is that a magazine called Christianity Today, the editor came out and said that Trump should be removed from office. For the media, this was a massive story, a huge, unparalleled story, because Christianity Today is a very popular magazine, particularly with evangelical Christians. It was founded by Billy Graham, and therefore it has a pretty good pedigree. Well, Franklin Graham, Billy's son, but Billy passed away last year. Franklin came out and he said, well, no. He said, my father was a supporter of President Trump's. I had no editorial input on this thing. And historically speaking, it is true that Mark Galli, who is the editor-in-chief of Christianity Today, has been extremely critical of the president in the past. In fact, just back in 2017, he wrote an entire piece about how President Trump's soul was in danger. So he has been very much on board with the President Trump is a very, very bad man. And therefore, because he's a bad, immoral man, he shouldn't be president trained for quite a while. Nonetheless, the media jumped on this as though it was something new. And this is indicative about how the media cover these things. The media doesn't know anything about the evangelical world. The media don't know anything about Christianity. They don't know anything about religious human beings. In fact, they are constantly surprised to learn things about religious human beings they didn't think were possible. Like that religious human beings sometimes have doubts about their own spirituality. Like that religious human beings disagree with one another. That religious human beings look at the Bible and interpret it sometimes. And these are all shocks to members of the media because none of them actually know anything about religion. Well, if they knew anything about Christianity Today, they would have actually done like a Google search of Mark Galli, and they could have found out that Mark Galli has for years been ripping the president up and down, and that Galli himself has been quite anti-Trump for quite some time. So that's not actually new. The fact that he came out and he suggested that Trump should be removed from office, that is not a new thing. Right? They're treating this like a man bites dog story. It's a dog bites man story to Mark Galli bites Trump story, realistically speaking. Now, in 1 second, I want to get into Mark Galli's perspective because Mark Galli's perspective is sort of interesting. It's sort of fascinating. And it does speak to a deeper conflict that is happening within the religious community over the nature of the United States right now. I'm going to get to it in just 1 second. First, let's talk for a second about the quality of your bedding. So as you can tell, I'm on the road. You know what that means. I'm not sleeping as well as I do at home. Why? Well, for one thing, I don't have the sheets that make me unbelievably comfortable. I'm talking about Boll and Branch sheets. Everything that Boll and Branch makes, from bedding to blankets, is made from pure 100% organic cotton. They start out super soft. They get even softer over time. You buy directly from them, so you're essentially paying wholesale prices. Luxury sheets can cost up to $1,000 in the store. Boll and Branch sheets are only a couple $100. Shipping is free. You can try them for 30 nights. There's no risk, no reason not to give them a try. Try Boll and Branch sheets today. You're going to love them. How do I know you're going to love them? Because if you don't like them, you can send them back. So, I mean, like, there really is no risk. For 30 nights, you can try them. So if it stinks, which it won't, you'll send them, but you're not going to. In fact, they're so good. My family actually threw out all the rest of our sheets and just got Boll and Branch. To get you started, right now, my listeners get $50 off your first set of sheets at bollandbranch.com, promo code Ben. Go to bollandbranch.com, promo code Ben today, and get $50 off your first set of sheets. That's BOLL and branch.com, promo code Ben, bollandbranch.com, promo code Ben. Okay, so here is the editorial that is making all the rounds. It's from Mark Galli, and it says, Trump should be removed from office. Quote, in our founding documents, Billy Graham explains that Christianity Today will help evangelical Christians interpret the news in a manner that reflects their faith. The impeachment of Donald Trump is a significant event in the story of our republic. It requires comment. The typical CT approach is to stay above the fray and allow Christians with different political convictions to make their arguments in the public square, to encourage all to pursue justice according to their convictions and treat their political opposition as charitably as possible. We want CT to be a place that welcomes Christians from across the political spectrum and reminds everyone that politics is not the end and purpose of our being. We take pride in the fact, for instance, that politics does not dominate our homepage. That seems like a smart way to do it, right? They're talking about eternal values and their perspective. So why exactly would you then cram down a perspective on something as hotly fraught as impeachment? That said, says Mark Galli, we do feel it necessary from time to time to make our opinions on political matters clear. Always, as Graham encouraged us, doing so with both conviction and love. We love and pray for our president as we love and pray for leaders, as well as ordinary citizens on both sides of the political aisle. Let's grant this to the president. The Democrats have had it out for him from day one, and therefore nearly everything they do is under a cloud of partisan suspicion. Again, this is Christianity Today's much ballyhooed editorial. This has led many to suspect not only motives, but facts in these recent impeachment hearings. And no, Mr. Trump did not have a serious opportunity to offer his side of the story in the House hearings on impeachment. But the facts in this instance are unambiguous. The President of the United States attempted to use his political power to coerce a foreign leader to harass and discredit one of the President's political opponents. That is not only a violation of the Constitution, more importantly, it is profoundly immoral. Okay, first of all, whether that is true or not is actually at issue. Right? The question that I've been asking for a long time is, was this about 2020 or was this about 2016? Was this about harassing Joe Biden with an eye toward 2020, Or was this President Trump, looking back at 2016, being irritated that he's been accused of cheating in the election by working with the Russians, being whispered in his ear by Rudy Giuliani that Ukraine was really behind some of the election manipulation, looking at stories in Politico and the New York Times about how the Ukrainian embassy was coordinating with members of the DNC to dig up dirt on Paul Manafort, hearing other rumors from Rudy Giuliani about other corruption going on in Ukraine. And so Trump, irritated by the Mueller report, being told by Rudy Giuliani that the 2016 election cycle was really about Ukraine, not about Russia, he decides that he's going to go forward with this quid pro quo attempt. It's not about 2020, in other words, it's about 2016. So the question was always, what is Trump's intent here? Trump's intent was never proved because only one witness who actually had an actual human conversation with Donald Trump, Gordon Sondland, testified, and he didn't bring the goods. This is the problem for the Democrats' case. It's why not a single Republican is peeled off. But according to Mark Galley, the facts are not in dispute. Okay, but that's really not the crux of this piece. The crux of this piece is that he thinks that President Trump is an immoral man. And this is where we're going to get to a deeper question in America right now. And that is, do we have a social fabric such that it is possible for us to cast someone out of office for immorality alone? Do we have a social fabric where it's possible to even evaluate our candidates on a character level anymore? We'll ask that question in just 1 second. The editorial continues, says, the reason many are not shocked about this is that the president has dumbed down the idea of morality in his administration. He has hired and fired a number of people who are now convicted criminals. He himself has admitted to immoral actions in business and his relationship with women, about which he remains proud. Okay, all of that stuff is prior to his presidency, obviously. And this mirrors a lot of the things I believe about the president. I don't think that the president is of sterling character when it comes to his business or his women. You'd have to be, I think, blinding yourself to reality to think that. His Twitter feed alone, says Mark Galley, with his habitual string of mischaracterizations, lies, and slanders, is a near-perfect example of a human being who is morally lost and confused. Trump's evangelical supporters have pointed to his Supreme Court nominees, his defense of religious liberty, and his stewardship of the economy, among other things, as achievements that justify their support of the president. We believe the impeachment hearings have made it absolutely clear, in a way the Mueller investigation did not, that President Trump has abused his authority for personal gain and betrayed his constitutional oath. The impeachment hearings have illuminated the president's moral deficiencies for all to see. This damages the institution of the presidency, damages the reputation of our country, damages the spirit and future of our people. And then he equates this with the call for impeachment of President Clinton. He says the president's failure to tell the truth, even when cornered, rips at the fabric of the nation. This is not a private affair, for above all, social intercourse is built on a presumption of trust. Trust that the milk your grocer sells you is wholesome and pure. This is what they wrote about Clinton. Trust that the money you put in the bank can be taken out of the bank. Trust that your babysitter, firefighters, clergy, and ambulance drivers will all do their best. And while politicians are notorious for breaking campaign promises, while in office, they have a fundamental obligation to uphold our trust in them and to live by the law. See, unfortunately, the words that we applied to Mr. Clinton 20 years ago apply almost perfectly to our current president. Whether Mr. Trump should be removed from office by the Senate or by popular vote next election, that is a matter of prudential judgment. That he should be removed, we believe, is not a matter of partisan loyalties, but loyalty to the creator of the Ten Commandments. To the many evangelicals who continue to support Trump in spite of his blackened moral record, we might say, remember who you are and whom you serve. Consider how your justification of Mr. Trump influences your witness to your Lord and Savior. Consider what an unbelieving world will say if you continue to brush off Mr. Trump's immoral words and behavior in the cause of political expediency. If we don't reverse course now, says Mark Galley, will anyone take anything we say about justice and righteousness with any seriousness for decades to come? Can we say with a straight face that abortion is a great evil that cannot be tolerated and, with the same straight face, say that the bent and broken character of our nation's leader doesn't really matter in the end? We have reserved judgment on Trump for years now. Some have criticized us for our reserve. When it comes to condemning the behavior of another, patient charity must come first. So we've done our best to give evangelical Trump supporters their due, to try and understand their point of view, to see the prudential nature of so many political decisions they have made regarding Mr. Trump. To use an old cliche, it's time to call a spade, to say that no matter how many hands we win in this political poker game, we are playing with a stacked deck of gross immorality and ethical incompetence. And just when we think it's time to pull all our chips to the center of the table, that's when the whole game will come crashing down. It will crash down on the reputation of evangelical religion and on the world's understanding of the gospel. It will come crashing down on a nation of men and women whose welfare is also our concern. Okay, so that's the much ballyhooed editorial. As I say, it's not new, so it's weird for the media to treat it as news, but it's an argument that ought to be confronted by evangelicals, and also it should be confronted by religious people of every stripe and by Republicans who look at Trump's character and say, yeah, Trump is a man who has always had serious, real, and abiding character problems. And now, that really doesn't have to do with impeachment. And here's sort of the point. If you are going to link impeachment, and Mark Galley basically says this, right? He says, whether it's impeachment or whether it's the next election, we got to get Trump out. But that now becomes a political question, not just a moral question. And this is what I'm going to explain in a second. In order for it to be true that the chief question in an election is the moral character of our leaders, we have to have a broad social fabric agreement on values across the board. I'll explain that in just 1 second. First, let's talk about protecting your data. And the fact is that the Daily Wire invests tons of resources into cybersecurity, like a lot, because there are lots of people out there trying to hack us. We have to protect our security. We have to protect our data. You as an individual ought to be doing the same thing, because the fact is, you don't need tons of hackers trying to hack you in order to make your life miserable. All you need is one, because if you're unprotected, they take that credit card number and they just run that out there on the dark web, and next thing you know, they've stolen your identity. Or they steal your data and then they militarize it against you. They use it in some way. Or big tech grabs it and then they use it and they monetize it without your permission. This is why you ought to have ExpressVPN. You might be thinking security threats don't affect you. This is wrong. All they have to do is get you once. That's it. You have to be right every time. They only have to be right once. This is why you should be using ExpressVPN, and then they can't even hack you once. So when are you going to get ExpressVPN? Do it now. Visit my special link right now, expressvpn.com/Ben. Get an extra 3 months of ExpressVPN for free. Protect your internet today with the VPN I trust to keep my data safe. Go to expressvpn.com/Ben to get started. That's expressvpn.com/Ben to get started. expressvpn.com/Ben. Okay, so a lot of the logic in this piece is logic that honestly I felt back in 2016. Really, I felt that President Trump back in 2016 was not of moral character to be president of the United States, and so I didn't vote for him and I didn't vote for Hillary Clinton. It is also true that when it comes to the allegation that everyone who voted for Trump was somehow selling themselves out morally, that was something I just didn't agree with. I didn't believe that was true. I thought that the prudential consideration that was being made by many Republicans was short-sighted. And in some ways I was wrong, and in some ways I'm not sure if I was wrong. Right, we'll have to see 10 years from now. History will be the judge. I mean, we'll find out 10 years from now how this plays out. He's been much more conservative than I thought he would be. He has justified his statements on religious freedom, on abortion, on a wide variety of issues that I care deeply about as not only a religious human being, but as just a conservative generally. But when it comes to the implication that is being drawn by this editorial, that's something I never did in the 2016 election. I never said to people, if you vote for Trump, it makes you a bad human being or a bad Christian. The implication of this editorial is that if you vote for Trump, or if you think he shouldn't be impeached, it's because you have decided to make Trump into an idol. And if you watch Mark Galli's Twitter feed after this, that's basically all the things he's been tweeting out. He's been tweeting out a variety of emails from people who have fallen into a sort of idolatry for Trump. There was one thing he tweeted out. Somebody texted him or emailed him and said, Jesus isn't coming back anytime soon. We need Trump as our protector. And he was like, well, now you're substituting Trump for Jesus. That's not cool. Well, if I were a Christian, I'd feel the same way. Obviously, as a Jew, I feel the same way. Trump cannot become God to you. Trump is a human being with all of his attendant flaws and with all of his attendant qualities. You know, there's good, there's bad. That's who Trump is. But to substitute Trump for your faith is, of course, a large mistake. However, in order to make the claim that you are undermining your own faith, that you're undermining your own morality by opposing Trump's impeachment, let's assume for a second, Galli's case, which is yet to be proved, that Trump did something super terrible here and that it's worthy of impeachment. Even assuming that is the case, on a pragmatic level, can a moral human being say, you know what, we don't live in an America anymore where I trust the other side to abide by rules? Because I think that is really what's going on here. I think that in the best of all possible worlds, most evangelical Christians and most Americans and most religious people across America would say to themselves that when a president sins, we would rather that person not be president. But we also recognize we don't live in that ideal world. We live in a very flawed real world where political priorities are connected to candidates and where the solid ground that we thought we were standing on in the aftermath of Richard Nixon leaving office, the solid ground where there are some lines you just don't cross. And if you cross those lines, then we're going to stand up and say, no way. That died during the Clinton impeachment. It did. It died because it turned out that half the country was willing to say, yes, he committed open perjury. Yes, the man was a derelict. Yes, the man lied under oath. Yes, he committed obstruction of justice, but we don't care because he's going to give us abortion. And so a bunch of people on the right said, okay, well, then we don't share the social fabric anymore. See, in order for you to believe that moral people are betraying the social fabric by not throwing a president out of office for immorality, you have to believe that there is a social fabric that is there in the first place. In other words, we all have to be living in the same sphere. Right? We all have to be living on the same moral plane. We have to at least have a certain level of baseline. If the baseline is not there, then there's no net, right? I mean, then you are operating without a net. And then it just becomes, okay, well, the Democrats are going to take over. They're never going to impeach a president no matter what he does. That president is going to come in and mandate abortion, basically, is going to come in and is going to suggest that you have to pay for other people's abortions. And as a religious human being, you're an evangelical Christian, you say to yourself, okay, so here is the balance now. The balance is not between a moral United States and a less moral United States. The balance now is between policies that are going to preserve the lives of the unborn and policies that are not, because the moral United States is gone. Okay, and this is the great tragedy of what's happened in the United States over the last 30, 40 years. There's a mainstream belief, right, left, and center, that the moral basis of the United States is not here anymore. There's no social fabric we share where we think that certain activity is off limits and certain activity is still within limits. We don't think that anymore. And evangelical Christians are coming along now with Trump, and they're saying, okay, he's a recognition of something we didn't want to recognize. He's a recognition that, listen, I know tons of evangelicals, they were very, very split of mind, even though they voted overwhelmingly for Trump. They were very split of mind about Trump himself. And now, here's where Galley's observation makes sense. Okay, if Galley's observation is that people who fall into idolatry are betraying religion, that of course is true. And if his observation is that it's very bad for religious people to make excuses for Trump's bad behavior, that's true too. I've been saying that all along. Every time Trump does something that's bad, does something that's immoral, does something that's wrong, it is up to moral people to say that is bad, that is wrong, that is no good. But when it comes to the prudential consideration of who ought to be leading policymaking, we can no longer operate under the assumption that we all agree that immoral people should not be president. We don't all agree on that. Bill Clinton was president. Okay, we don't agree on that. And we haven't agreed on that for quite some time. And the right acknowledging that and saying, okay, well, I guess if the choice is between playing by Marcus of Queensberry rules while they crotch punch us on the moral issue and then implement policy that actually harms our religious freedom, then I guess we'll have to acknowledge a reality that we wish we didn't have to acknowledge, which is that we don't live in a country of shared morality anymore. And here's how you know this is true. If there were an evangelical pastor in a community and that evangelical pastor committed adultery, that evangelical pastor presumably would be out of a job tomorrow. Why? Why? Doesn't matter how much charity he raises. Doesn't matter how much he has done to build the church. Doesn't matter how many people he has converted. If an evangelical pastor commits adultery and that comes out in the church, he's out. The reason is because the constituents all share the same moral fabric. It's certainly true in my religious community, right? That if the rabbi does something wrong, the rabbi's out. Why? Because we all share the same moral fabric. And this is true in our local community, right? If you're in a local community with a lot of people who share your same moral sentiments, if somebody does something morally wrong, even if you like their politics, you say, okay, well, we all share enough that the risk of us getting rid of this guy isn't the complete demise of all of our priorities, and also we at least get to uphold a certain moral level. But when we don't share anything, when we don't share politics, when we don't share morality, then every political battle becomes a life or death battle where morality of the politician takes a back seat. Now, again, your own morality is still on the line when it comes to how you characterize that politician. This is where the editorial is right. Right? It does not behoove any evangelical, any religious person, any religious Jew, anybody in the United States to cover for bad acts by a politician. You know, be upfront about the fact that you're going to vote for Trump, even though you think that the guy is horrible with women. That's true. He is horrible with women. I'm not going to lie about that. I'm also going to recommend that if we're going to elect somebody, that the top priority be that that person implements policies that are not going to continue to undercut not only the social fabric, but things that are endemic to our rights, things like religious freedom, things like freedom of speech. Now, all the pillars of our civilization are crumbling away right now. And some of those central pillars are the rights that are protected by the Bill of Rights. If somebody is a moral person, and the left proclaims them moral, but we know the left doesn't care about morality because the left was fine with Bill Clinton, right? If the left says, well, here's our moral candidate who's going to chip away at all the foundations, they haven't restored any moral fabric. There's a lack of basic trust. And the lack of basic trust continues on a day-to-day level. And you can see how the editor of Christianity Today is actually running right past Trump. It's quite fascinating. It's an interesting intellectual exercise. So here is Mark Galli, the editor of Christianity Today, saying that when Christians support an immoral cause, it does damage to my cause. Well, that's true. But you have to define immoral cause. Is the immoral cause you're supporting Trump being an adulterous lech with Stormy Daniels? If that's the moral cause, then I agree. If the immoral cause is I'm going to vote for a politician who is going to preserve the right to religious freedom and the right to life, and I'm going to freely acknowledge that the man is horrible on a variety of character scores, but also that I don't trust a Democrat to uphold those basic rights, and so I'm not going to do this thing, Okay, that's not immoral. So here's the Christianity Today editor who's conflating the two. And again, I think the reason he's conflating the two is because there are so many people who do make the mistake of conflating the president's character with his accomplishments. There are a lot of people out there who do this routine where it's like, I love these judges. I love what he's doing. I love the man. The man's great. Okay, you can love the man. You can love what he's doing. You can love all these things. But you got to acknowledge the man's sins. If you're a religious person and you hope to obtain any solid objective sense of morality, here's Mark Galley.
As a Christian, I like to think of myself as a person who has given my ultimate loyalty to Jesus Christ and the gospel he's called us to proclaim. So when Christians of any stripe support a cause that strikes me as manifestly immoral, it does damage to the cause that I've given my life to. So I think that's one part of the equation that all Christians, especially my brothers and sisters in the evangelical world, need to think about more seriously and more deeply.
Okay, and then President Trump immediately fires back on Twitter, and you can see they're talking right past one another, right past one. It's fascinating, right? Trump fires back, and he says, I guess the magazine Christianity Today is looking for Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, or those of socialist communist bent to guard their religion. How about Sleepy Joe? The fact is, no president has ever done what I have done for evangelicals or religion itself. So you can see in Trump's tweet how he's missing Galley, and you can see from Trump's tweet why Galley is saying what he's saying, right? From Trump's tweet, you see he's missing Galley because he's not saying, listen, I'm going to try to be a better moral person. I am a moral person. I'm trying to do my best. I'm struggling with it. Instead, it's, look how much I've done. And this is how a lot of evangelical voters are looking at Trump, right? He is a vessel for policy priorities because there is no social fabric anymore, and you just need a guy on the wall. And if that guy is Trump, that's the guy who's on the wall. Okay, and then the very end is why Galley can't stand Trump, right? The very end where he says, no president has ever done what I have done for religion itself. Right? Galley's like, well, hold up a second now. Now you're getting into my territory because the fact is that the president, when it comes to upholding religion and the cultural value of religion, having a president who actively stands for moral values is actually a pretty important thing. So you can see Trump is talking right past Galley. Galley is talking right past Trump. And all of that is because of the tragic occurrence that our social fabric is worn. We don't trust each other with morality. We don't have a shared social institution like a church. We don't, that's not a recommendation, I'm a Jew. It's not a recommendation of top-down religion. We do not have shared social institutions where we share values anymore. And in the absence of values, politics becomes everything. Politics becomes absolutely everything. That's what's going on. And that's why you're seeing this divide. So you can have sympathy for Galley and what he's saying morally, and at the same time recognize that what he's saying about other Christians is actually wrong on the merits. Okay, in just a second, I'm going to talk about why it is that we feel like there is no social fabric, because it's pretty obvious we feel like there is no social fabric. First, let's talk about the fact that life insurance is probably on your to-do list. So, life insurance, I know, you don't want to think about it. We're getting near the end of the year. You're thinking, oh, do I really want, it's a great time of the year. Think about your own death. Think about your own mortality. You're like, oh, no. Yeah, but you got to get it done. So go to policygenius.com. They don't have to think about it anymore. Policy Genius makes this super easy. Policy Genius makes finding the right life insurance a breeze. In minutes, you can compare quotes from the top insurers to find your best price. You could save $1,500 or more a year by using Policy Genius to compare life insurance policies. Once you apply, the Policy Genius team will handle all the paperwork and the red tape. And Policy Genius doesn't just make life insurance easy. They can also help you find the right home and auto insurance, disability insurance. This holiday season, do something for your family. Do something for your loved ones. Go check out policygenius.com right now. Get all the insurance coverage you will ever need. Go do their life insurance right now at policygenius.com. Competitive shopping saves you money and time. It only takes a few minutes to find the right life insurance policy, apply, cross another thing off your to-do list. Policy Genius. When it comes to life insurance, it is indeed nice to get it right. Policygenius.com. Go check them out right now. That's policygenius.com. Okay, so you can see why people are coming apart at the seams. Why are evangelical Christians supporting Trump? Because they look at the culture and they see people who are being featured in the culture, like Robert De Niro, for example, prominent people in the culture. And they say to themselves, these are the people I'm supposed to trust with morality? I'm going to be lectured by Robert De Niro on the moral compass of our leader. I'm going to be lectured by people who are for abortion on demand all the way up till birth on the morality of the leader of the free world. Because it seems to me that I can criticize Trump's morality being a moral human being in my own right, but people in Hollywood, they don't have any right to do this. De Niro says, there has not been one thing about this person that has been redeeming as far as I can see. He said, shame on them. And then he said that he would like to see a bag, quote, I'd like to see a bag of bleep right in his face. Bleep being feces. Hit him right in the face like that and let the picture all go all over the world. He needs to be humiliated. He needs to be confronted and humiliated by whoever his opponent is. They have to stand up to him. They don't have to do it in an obvious physical way, but they have to have the formidability to confront him and put him in his place, because the people have to see that, to see him be humiliated. Okay, religious people understand that Robert De Niro isn't talking just about Trump there. Robert De Niro is talking about any religious Christian, anybody who disagrees with him on politics, anybody who disagrees with him on abortion. Robert De Niro is not just talking about his personal dislike for Trump. In fact, were it not for the fact that Trump is a Republican, Robert De Niro would be having dinner with Donald Trump. Donald Trump was featured on the Emmy Awards. Donald Trump had a huge show on national TV. He was hanging out with all these people. Hillary and Bill Clinton were at his wedding. The same people who want to hit him with a bag of bleep right in the face today are the same people who 5 seconds ago were hobnobbing with him. Why? Not because they're so upset over his moral qualities. It's been obvious for 50 years of Donald Trump's life what his moral qualities are. It's specifically because they're upset with his politics. This is the lie. This is where the untruth is obvious. When Mark Galli says that people are looking at evangelical Christians and they're saying, look at those hypocrites because they support Donald Trump. Do you think any of those people had great love for evangelical Christians when they were supporting Mitt Romney? Great love for evangelical Christians when they were supporting George W. Bush? I don't. I mean, I'm a religious person. I don't remember secular people loving me anymore when I was supporting George W. Bush or John McCain or Mitt Romney. I don't remember that at all. Neither does anybody else religious in America. We were getting crapped on day in and day out for years. When Trump says they're attacking me because they're attacking you, that's true. They're not attacking him for all the reasons they say they're attacking him. You think anyone in Hollywood gives 2 damns about Donald Trump's sex life? These people will shtup anything that walks, 4 legs, 2 legs, a centipede. It does not matter. And these are people who live the most dissolute lifestyles that you could possibly imagine. And then you really believe that they're sitting there like prudish Calvinists being like, oh, well, you know, Donald Trump and his personal moral standards, this is where I draw the line. No, the reason they hate Trump is because Trump represents a bunch of people they hate even more than they hate Trump. By the way, if Donald Trump were a deeply moral person, they'd hate him even more than they do. They would. If Donald Trump were, because you know how I can tell you this? Mike Pence. Right? Mike Pence. End of story. They're castigating. They crapped all over Mike Pence for saying that he won't go to dinner with a woman not his wife. So don't give me that it's all about Donald Trump's moral character or that they're going to look at evangelicals like they are hypocrites. Okay, the only reason they would look at evangelicals like they're hypocrites if evangelicals look the other way on Trump doing this stuff, right? That's legit, right? If a religious person says Trump's adultery, bad for you, good for him. No, bad for everybody. Okay, but if you're going to pretend that you're appealing to people by ripping on Trump's moral character, okay, you're not appealing to these people. Like, I promise you that the only time Christianity Today has ever received a kind word in the press, ever, the only time Billy Graham has received a kind word in the press, ever, is when they came out against Trump. It's the only time ever. I promise you. You will not find a single New York Times article going back as long as this magazine has been around, praising Christianity Today for their moral stance. Ever. So what is this really about? It's about they don't like Trump. And they don't want Trump in office. That's why he's receiving the strange new respect. They don't respect you. They only respect you when they think they can make hay out of you. That is all that is happening here. And religious people understand that, and that is why religious people are fighting back against all of this. This is why there's an article in the New York Times over the weekend called Fear and Loyalty, How Donald Trump Took Over the Republican Party. The president demands complete fealty, and as the impeachment hearings showed, he has largely attained it. To cross him is to risk a future in GOP politics. Okay, that's true. I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think that if you're a politician and you criticize Trump, I think that could be a serious problem for you. But I think it's also in how you criticize Trump. Meaning, if you criticize Trump and you say, look, dude's terrible with women. One of the problems here is that Trump, because he is so vindictive, he can't just let stuff like that go. He has to try and defend himself from stuff that's obviously true. And so he says things that to target members of his own party, which is foolishness. But beyond that, I think that people see attacks, because people rightly see attacks on Trump very often as attacks on them. They've started to see any attacks on Trump as attacks on them. And that's a mistake. That is a mistake. If you start to see any attack on Trump as an attack on you, you got to consider the source. You got to consider the nature of the attack. Is it coming from a place of love, or is it coming from a place of you want to see him fall because you hate his priorities? You got to actually analyze all of that. But again, the divisions in the country are so deep right now and so abiding that people don't trust each other. Like, look, we know we're not going to get credit. Let's be real about this. If the Republicans got rid of Donald Trump tomorrow, let's say the Republicans in the Senate turned around and tomorrow they're like, you know what, you're right, impeached. And they got rid of Trump. And Mike Pence were president. Do you think the Democrats would turn around and say, look at those moral, decent, beautifully ethical Republicans, and now they're running this beautifully ethical man, Mike Pence, and they've really turned a corner. You know what? I'm voting Republican tomorrow. Anyone think that? Anyone? Because if you do, you hit your head on a rock. That's not the way this works anymore. We are past that. Maybe back in 1973, people thought that. And maybe that was more accurate back in 1973 when Richard Nixon was resigning. It ain't accurate now. It hasn't been accurate for 30 years in this country.